Heaven is shining down rays of gold.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Indian ABA with Martin and Dan. I'm your host, Martin. Alongside is my co-host, Dan. Boy, I'm excited. Season 2 is finally here after a little brief hiatus.
Yeah, definitely. I share your excitement, Martin, and I'm even more excited to have our special guest, Troy Burg of at Behavioral Stories here. If you guys follow Troy on Instagram or perhaps on LinkedIn, you see he's an excellent advocate for employees in the field, and he helps many RBTs, many professionals in human services as well as ABA to cope with strategies finding employment opportunities that are inclusive and beneficial for them, that they have the psychological safety to thrive within. So welcome to season 2, everybody. Aloha and aloha. Welcome, Troy.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me, guys. I'm happy to be here and I'm excited to talk.
Awesome. So, I guess we want to just dive right in. If you guys have been listening this whole time, thank you very much. We like to get into the nitty gritty and go right into the weeds. So, Troy, I'm wondering, how do you, both through your outreach and behavioral stories, help RBTs in the field from your perspective?
Yeah, so for one, Behavioral Stories is a marketing business that's more for marketing, networking, and eventually I want to help other companies and maybe people market their services or themselves so they can build that network within ABA, right? Because we all know once you graduate, I haven't graduated yet, but you don't graduate with a network. You don't graduate with all the resources, you have to network yourself. So that's more what Behavioral Stories is for. However, in my journey, I will always advocate for fair business practices because marketing is one business, and two, I feel like I can market in my business about fair business practices. I will always advocate.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up marketing as well, because actually marketing and employee wellness can have a bit of a connecting branch within the field of ABA, or basically within a subset of ABA, we have organizational behavior management practices that use the science of applied behavior analysis to better employee health and wellness, as well as can be used in a sort of company culture marketing aspect as well. And I'm wondering if you might have some things to share about OBM, or if you've seen any OBM practitioners in the field that may be a good example to encompass the subject for our audience.
So I think a good discussion can occur around performance for RBTs, right? How can we use OBM to enhance the performance of RBTs? And one is reinforcement schedules. Okay. We all know the reinforcement schedules, or maybe people watching don't, but I think if they're watching a behavior-based podcast, they probably do. So we have, the fixed interval, variable interval, fixed ratio, and variable ratio. Almost all RBTs are only paid on an interval schedule of reinforcement, right? They're paid for their time. They're not paid for their performance. So I think OBM can help by adding fixed ratio and variable ratio schedules by tying their performance to pay, right? Let's say you pick up 20 subsessions in a month, which is really good. If you pick up 20 subsessions, we reinforce that performance with some extra pay. So I do think, just paying people for their time isn't going to be the sustainable option, because let's be real, if you're paying someone for their time, what are they going to give you? Their time, not necessarily their performance. So we do need to add those performance-based schedules. Then also we can use a task analysis, right? Breaking things down into a process, step by step for RBTs. How can we implement this protocol? Well, we break it down step by step. That's simple as that. And then positive feedback. We have to be giving feedback. We have to be making sure our feedback is actually quality feedback. Why are we giving the feedback? Is the feedback we're giving necessary? There's a lot of things that go into play with that, but we want to make sure we're giving good, positive feedback to all RBTs.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that you brought up the schedules of reinforcement, because not only do we have to consider how often are RBTs getting paid and for what time, but we do want to consider quality as a performance reinforcement aspect. Organizational behavior management is a lot to do with finding those schedules of reinforcement that work well for our students, our clients, our employees, and the people that basically make things run in our lives. It goes well beyond just employees. For instance, you'll see oftentimes in your own, in your own families, right? For instance, you value the quality of the time more than the quantity of the time, right? This is
100%.
something,
Good point.
yeah, builds trust, right? And it's another way that you can see OBM, ABA, and a lot of different applications of applied behavior analysis. Sleep science is another one, behavioral sleep science, have the principles involved and can have a very different environment surrounding the field. When we apply behavioral principles, we can go deeper than what is already been practiced. And I think perhaps there is a great need, especially in recent times, with things like the Great Resignation or things like the declining mental health of employees after COVID-19 and things like that, to invent and be a little bit perhaps avant-garde, creative, whatever you want to call it, with practices that promote psychological safety and wellness. A schedule you may have glossed over but not specifically mentioned, amongst fixed and variable ratio schedules of reinforcement, we can have a non-contingent basis for employee reinforcement, which I think builds that trust, that initial safety with employees and organizations.
I actually want to give you guys some examples of, NCR occurring in the workplace. So a good way to implement NCR is you could just add an RBT's favorite snacks in the break room, just because. That's non-contingent reinforcement. Another thing you could do is buy an RBT some coffee, just because. You could get them materials for their session, just because. You can do all those things as a NCR procedure form. And then you got to think about verbal praise. That doesn't cost $1. It doesn't even cost a cent to just randomly provide verbal praise to someone to increase their morale. So I'm glad you mentioned NCR, so I can give you some ways on how OBM could do that, because I do think you can fill the break room without having to engage in a certain behavior, right? You can just fill the break room for your employees with all their favorite stuff. And then again, verbal praise, guys, it's free. We don't need, that doesn't cost $1. There's no excuse not to be using verbal praise.
Absolutely. And by the way, everybody, pat yourselves on the back for being here and maybe for suffering through that moment where my video went out. Thank you for continuing to listen.
I didn't know if that was just me or if it was everything.
Oh, yeah,
So
it was me, but I fixed it. We always have a few little issues when we communicate from Hawaii and all the way to California as well. So thank you for bearing with me. And for instance, just having initial patience a lot of times too can act as a NCR procedure through employees. Extra time. People often call the function of behaviors where you need extra time, you need a break, you need PTO, whatever. They call it an escape, and maybe that brings it perhaps a negative value, right? And making people not want to initially provide PTO, let's say before 90 days, right? But what if you get sick, right? And what if transitioning to a new job is hard for you? There are a lot of things non-contingent reinforcement can do to make it a more inclusive environment for both neurodivergent employees as well as just employees of all ages, employees of all different types of attribution that can bring a set of values that we need in this field of ABA, in marketing, and in employee management, employee health and wellness. So for instance, you non-contingently can give a wellness day. You can give the coffee, just like Troy said. You can have a flexible schedule. And I don't think an employee is trying to escape here. In this case, they are looking for what I like to call release, right? So maybe it's a more person-centered approach that's needed both in ABA as well as organizational behavior management and management altogether, where we can find those ways to allow non-contingent release from the stressors that are innate to working in a new environment. I think there's so much data, so much research that's gone into how difficult adapting to a new job can be for almost anyone. And perhaps given that knowledge already exists, employees should have accessed a little more understanding upon their onboarding in getting that non-contingent wellness package, those benefits, and perhaps even resources, right? Things they're not used to accessing with their health insurance that they can now access, like therapy organizations. We honestly want to be talking more about this as we go more into our outreach. And I'm sure Martin, has been working really hard lately just to show the deficits within the field that exist for neurodivergent employees that perhaps we need to start working to fill the gap for. So Martin, especially since my video keeps going out, I wonder if you might have some important recent work that you'd like to share, or perhaps some facts for us about the differences in statistics and the gap that I just mentioned here.
Yes, I'm going to pull up my slides here, but the biggest thing we are dealing with right now, workplace bullying. I mean, that is the biggest issue that we face, and research shows that the bullying starts in school and continues in the workforce, and I'm gonna be honest, it's a touchy subject for me to talk about because I have dealt with workplace bullying, so it's kind of like I want to say the right things, but what I really hope to see is the number of autistics that don't have a job, because right now the current stats is 83% of them after getting their degree aren't hired and don't have a job. And so there's got to be a way we could change that. I mean, it's hard to see, and I wish there was people out there who hire them to be more accommodating during the hiring process, because hiring's already difficult enough. And it's like we try our best, but it's hard to say the right answers without feeling so nervous, and then that gives them the sound like, oh yeah, he's not worth hiring or she's not worth hiring. And something's got to change, because we deserve to be in the workforce like everybody else.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Martin. And Troy, I'm wondering if you've seen some examples of this in your area as well. You guys are both in California, I know, but still, California is a huge state, and practices still vary up and down the coast very much. So wondering how things are locally for you, as well as what your perspective is on the national and international field that we're working in terms of neuro inclusion and getting practices to be more up to speed with what we might need in the future to create retention, wellness, health, and a vast majority of people wanting to stay with their jobs, right, going forward.
Yeah, so I'll be quick on this one, but workplace bullying is not acceptable. So for example, I can't remember the source, but fear of retaliation actually leads to employees withholding information.
Yep.
So if someone is being bullied, you as a manager are being put at risk for them to withhold information. And you never want your employees to withhold information from you if you're the manager, because then you're missing out on crucial learning opportunities, basically, to create a better psychologically safe work environment for your employees. So workplace bullying is just not acceptable in any form, because like I said, the fear of retaliation is research-based, led to employees withholding information. So I'll say that.
Yeah.
Definitely. And by the way, people, workplace retaliation is illegal, right? You don't want to ever be seen as retaliating, for instance, instantaneously responding to a ethical complaint or a serious concern that an employee has with a company with something that might be reprimanding or punitive to that employee is legally considered workplace retaliation. And occasionally managers may not even realize they're doing it. I've even been in situations where a staff got an email right after they did something they thought was honorable, credible, and all of a sudden they have their hours reduced for some reason. Something had fallen through, or they need a BST before they can go back in. And they say, is this because of me just speaking out on something that I thought was important, like ethics of a treatment plan? And sometimes managers say, oh, that email was just sent late. But it doesn't matter. You know, if this is happening in a timely fashion, instantaneously after somebody does something they thought was credible and they should be doing that speaks to their ethics and their integrity, you are not reinforcing that integrity. What you're doing now is punishing that. And not only are you instantaneously decreasing the likelihood they're going to be integral in the near future, it also opens up a whole host of negative long-term side effects, which will cause employees not to want to report things like you said, Troy, or essentially avoid these people who are the punishers in this situation, avoid them knowing about what they do day to day, avoid them knowing about anything, right? Because this is how punishment works. First, you stop doing that behavior right in front of that person, and then you find ways to access the reinforcement you well need and deserve outside of them. But the con here is that relationship no longer really exists. The bridge is burned, and now we have burnout. To draw association here with that burning rate. Where does it start? You know, it starts with lack of trust. It starts with the motivation for non-transparency being given by retaliation, like you said, Troy. So it doesn't have to be a big thing either. It can be very small. If it's your first impression with the company and all you've ever seen is you tried to do your job and they gave you instantaneous negative feedback, then what does the data suggest? Now 100% of your interactions with that employer have been negative. What does that say? Likelihood to keep that job and want to stay there? That seems to make it very unlikely.
Definitely unlikely.
Yeah, I would say if it's 100% negative, it's almost negligible. Why would anybody be keeping that job? And unfortunately, employers may still be able to use those unfortunate first impression misunderstandings as justification to let go an employee, particularly our neurodivergent employees that we value, right? When somebody is having difficulty transitioning, do they often stay to their 90 days? The answer is no. And this is why we have what's called a revolving door in the field of ABA. They say the RBTs in one company, they do the training, they do the onboarding, then they get retaliated, and then they leave and go to the next.
I do also want to bring up, I feel like with autistics in general, it does get hard to go through these interviews. And I suggest that for those who are recruiters that do the hiring process, just let them know ahead of time, like, hey, this interview is going to be like we're talking normally, and if they give us that ahead of time, our brains would be more relaxed and we don't have to struggle with the words that we're trying to say. And I've learned that the hard way. Some of these questions from previous places I've applied to didn't have questions that weren't too inviting per se. It was more like technical, or Daniel, you got to help me out here. Technical words.
They may not want to know the broad sense of what you think. They just want to know yes or no. Have you done this or that?
Right. But yeah, there's been a couple times where they get like super detailed questions, and it's like, it kind of brought the vibe down a little bit. And before we move on to the next question, for anybody who has a tough time working, I totally get that. I mean, for those who see me on camera, I am wiped out from work in the last 5 years, but I suggest having a quiet room for the autistic coworkers to de-stress and relax, get their brain recharged, and continue with the day. Because if we're in places that are like super loud or very bright lights, or even somewhere where we're not comfortable with, it's going to be hard for us to get the job done. But if we have like a room for us that allow us to take at least maybe a 30-minute to an hour break, we could get back to what we were doing and get the job done easier. And I just hope that businesses could follow that suit, because we're really hard workers. It's just like we have a tough time not being so overwhelmed a lot. And so I just really, really want to see that happen. And I even told, like, I wish where I work, we had a break room where it wasn't too loud for me to de-stress and like get ready to finish the job, because sometimes it can get overwhelming and we just want to do the best that we can and show, hey, we are wonderful coworkers and a valuable asset to the company. But yeah, I'm really hoping.
I hope the same as you, Martin. And I do want to say, for those who are planning on implementing some more inclusive environments for their employees, planning on doing better, and maybe you're concerned that, how am I going to make it quiet? Some people may not think that's possible, but the important thing is that you try. And there's lots of different things employers all over are doing to make more inclusive workspaces. There are ergonomic benefits, right? I'm sure people really appreciate when they are able to get comfortable office chairs and noise canceling headphones for instances where the office may be too stressful, or people who have the ability to work remotely when it's not absolutely necessary for them to be in that physical space at that time. Yeah. That can go a long way to easing that transition, to helping people build trust with their employers, get used to a new environment. And then, you know what, when we're comfortable, right, what are we going to do? We're going to be able to expand our ability to adapt to daily challenges on the job. These things aren't going to be so concerning, and hopefully people won't have to deal with a potential misunderstanding resulting in retaliation, or potential just punitive actions that are expired. They're based in the experience the employer themselves had being an employee when they were younger, right? And a lot of these things, people aren't realizing the behavioral aspect, again, are going to end up being punitive. They're going to be aversive stimuli. Just having a stressful, really stressful internal work environment, or I mean physical environment, going into a job on a daily basis, what is happening there? You enter your job, instantaneously are confronted with an aversive stimulus, and that is, on a small level, punishment to your soul. It will make it, I mean, for lack of a better word, you're going to go in there and then be less likely to go in there again afterwards, just by that simple one interaction that you've had. And again, at the first day, that becomes 100%, and it sets a bad tone. Of course, it can get better. And I want to say, for managers out there and employers who are building companies, building environments, you can be that person, just like an BCBA or an RBT wants to be to their client, their student, their learner. You can be that hero who saves the day for new employees, that mentor who gives the patient somebody really needs just to adjust to a new role, a new responsibility, or perhaps that teacher, right, who is able to lend their assistance until the valuable skill is learned, and that individual is then able to thrive, the company thrives more, and it's really a win-win for both the employer and the employee. So in essence, we should be motivated to do that. If we're seeing people, okay, they actually They say they really like working here right away. I wonder what we did. Pay close attention. Give that person a really low response effort survey to fill out to let you know what exactly you did right. And do that again. Do it a million, bajillion, gazillion times, and then pat yourself on the back and give out some free coffee to everybody. And, make sure people have the benefits, the wellness packages, the bonuses, the PTO, the access to therapy, ergonomics, and other things that humans need to maintain themselves, in order to thrive and go forward. And you don't have to be in BCBA and no ABA to do all this. I think we're all hearing things we've heard before. And, these are part of the human experience, right? People build relationships with their community, and they expect a little bit of non-contingent reinforcement, a little bit of connection, unconditional understanding from person to person. Be there. And, to make it even simpler, a lot of people just run their businesses, right? They don't have a business degree. They have a successful business because they know business is about relationships. And in any relationship, in order to be positive, you need trust, right? And you need dignity, respect, understanding, empathy, right? Gives that dopamine biologically when you feel seen, understood, and it will reinforce your employees. They say, this is so understanding. I feel like I can be myself here. That on its own is a non-contingent reward. But of course, it goes much, much deeper than that. And before we go too far, I do want to make sure that we give Troy a little chance to shine and show any of the efforts that he's been providing in the community, or any of the important events or products he'd like to tell us about. I'll go ahead and leave the floor to you, Troy.
Yeah, so I'm just going to piggyback off something you said, which is, sending out an assessment. I've never sent out assessments before, but if you've noticed, I've sent out preference assessments in the form of content. So recently I posted pick 2 of these options. You can only pick 2 and there's 5 options, right? That's how management and leadership can get feedback from their employees. Like you said, if a RBT joins a team and they really, really like the team, we have to pinpoint as leadership what we did to make them like this team, or else we're not going to be able to keep them around, right? Just because they're happy initially doesn't mean they're going to stay happy. Just because someone's happy in the workplace right now doesn't mean they're going to stay happy through the long run, right? We got to think about generalization and maintenance of behavior. If you want your RBT to stay at the company, you need to implement maintenance protocols to maintain that behavior.
Absolutely, definitely. And you know what? I think you guys really ought to check out Troy's Instagram on that note. He has a lot of really great information on how companies can be doing this, and maybe what are the red flags that some organizations may be inadvertently or advertently contributing to, and what to value in terms of looking for a new job. What may be a green flag for you, so that you know that you can expect a environment that promotes your wellness. Of course, all this stuff has to do with OBM, organizational behavior management, and we will be going into it more this season. I want to do a quick shout out to Kristyn Peterson. She does a really amazing OBM course series, and of which I've taken 2 series of, and anybody who wants to become a OBM, the field is very complex, but the process is very simple. The process is learn it and then do it, and tell people what are the benefits of having a skill set in helping employee health, wellness, retention, and psychological safety through the perspective of applied behavior analysis. This is a lot of words. That means just have a pitch deck, right? Have examples of how just having a more inclusive, more welcoming, and more intrinsically reinforcing environment can affect those statistics on that revolving door we talked about, that retention, that productivity, that ramp up, when transitioning to a new job. And, if you're able to afford it, apply more benefits. If your organization is thriving to the degree that you're making a profit and taking care of your employees and you have leftover stuff, it requires maintenance. The world is always changing, and people are going to come into contact with loss and disasters that may shake them, and they're going to want to turn to their employers in a little bit of ways to support them. So be ready, right? Be ready to be there for your employees and constantly work to increase benefits that promote their wellness. One thing Martin and I are really excited to talk about later this season is having therapy that gets autism. And we have a really amazing episode lined up next week with Bryce Walker. Some of you guys may remember her from last season at the ABA Unicorn, who is a really well-renowned behavior analyst and has a lot to say about the subject. So get ready for an extra special long episode next week, you guys. We're just starting off again this week. So Troy, before we go, is there anything else you want to promote or shout out real quick?
No, I think the last thing I'll say is the person you just talked about, Kristyn Peterson, for anyone that on Instagram, that's ABA in the wild. That is someone who will be able to provide you with some very in-depth OBM based information. I mean, CEUs and all. So that's what I wanted to add. And I do want to thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And Martin, I do want to make sure that you have a chance to talk about anything you might want to share before I go into the US Autism Show, and then we will see you guys next week.
Definitely, yes. I'll be really brief. I found out I'm going to be speaking at San Jose City Hall for the Disability Awareness Day. I'm also going to be speaking at the first ever Disability Awareness Fair in Manteca for parents. And then I'm just excited about Special Olympics starting back up. We have our first practice tomorrow for flag football and our tournament on October 26th. So very excited about how the rest of this year is going to be.
Awesome. You guys, it's always so inspiring for me to see Martin not only doing athletic activities, but also his activism and his business, Inspire Autism's outreach as well. And within all these things and all the challenges he faces, he never gives up. So really pat yourself on the back there, Martin. You're, my hero in a lot of ways, inspiring me every day. And I hope you guys do check out his website, his resources, his book, Chatterbox, My Life with Autism, and it inspires you guys as well. One thing that's very inspiring coming up is the US Autism Show. Really quickly, we're going to talk about this. If you guys would like to attend, you can go to davincincrservices.org and scroll down to the US Autism Show Hawaii homepage. We are hosting the event out here in Oahu at the Hilton Waikiki we're planning, and we have a StreamYard virtual aspect. So if you can't make it to Hawaii, you can log in through that platform and we'll be able to embed the link on your favorite platforms. You can probably find it on LinkedIn, but also on the main website as well. And if you're able to fill out our survey, we'll send you a pre-sale link with our special early bird pricing for admission. Look out for our speakers, our very wonderful advocates and professionals and even performers across the field. Shout out to our friend Brian Middleton, Bearded Behaviorist, our friends at Non-Binary Solution, particularly our speaker, Amanda Ralston, our friend Dr. Shelby Dorsey, our friend Kelsey McKinnery of the Calm Great. Many of you maybe are fans of hers. She is very excited, also known as @One Neurodivergent Voice. And let's see, I can't remember. Am I forgetting anybody, Martin? Look out for Martin. My goodness, yeah. He's speaking at the event as well. I'm hoping maybe to see a few of those puppets, Martin. I'd love to have you talk more about your ventriloquism. And,
yeah, I might add a little ventriloquism to next week's episode. I just have to do a little more practice.
Analyst on Instagram and Safe Space, the ABA podcast. Sarah Bradford of SJ Child Show. But if I forgot anybody, I will list them in the description, so keep an eye out. And make sure to keep an eye out for Troy's Instagram and his LinkedIn page, and go ahead and follow him, support him as well.
Thank you for the shout out.
All right. Well, this about wraps up today's episode of ND and ABA with Martin and Dan. I'm your host, Martin. And with my host, Dan, we want to wish you a wonderful evening. I'm excited about next week's episode, so stay tuned. Bye, everyone.
All right, aloha, you guys. Thanks for coming, Troy.